Welcome to Writer Syndrome, a podcast about writing from start to finish. This episode's topic, we're getting into video games and narratives in video games. I'm Russ Capasso, and joining me as always is Tim Letney. Tim, what game are you playing right now?
What games am I playing right now?
Boy.
Oh, boy. Baldur's Gate 3. I've got a group that we're going through that, which has a sprawling narrative.
Yep.
What else? Alan Wake 2.
Yep.
Little Call of Duty.
Okay.
Geez, Mortal Kombat, Tekken 8.
Wow.
Oh, Helldivers 2.
Oh, of course. You got to spread democracy.
Yeah. I've been playing too much. And then a little bit of Roblox with my kids.
Nice.
How about you? What are you playing?
Oh man, I'm equally all over the place, I think. Let's see. I've been playing this game called Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. It's like a side-scrolling Castlevania style game. I've been playing Helldivers 2 as well. I haven't played with you yet. Maybe sooner or later.
For like 30 seconds before I had to go to a meeting.
Yeah. Playing Disco Elysium, slowly picking away at that one. That's a great one. A lot of storytelling aspects of that one. Ready or Not, which is like also surprisingly has a connected story between all the missions. It's kind of like a first person tactical shooter game. So
hey, we might have come across the reason why we're not writing so much right now.
I think we have. We need to delete all of our gaming habits and maybe write more. Or maybe we can go write for video games. Maybe that's what we need to do.
I mean, I know that there is not, I'm already going on a tangent, but there is this kind of like parasitic relationship, this fight for time, right? But I tend to game later in the evening and my brain is mush anyway. Like there's no way that I'm sitting down and writing at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
I was thinking about John Carpenter because he's like, all I do is play video games. I don't want to make movies. I just play video games. But it does. It can like, if you let it, it can gobble up so much of your time. It's a very...
We need to find the success with our novels where then we can be like, yeah, I can just play video games all day.
Well, they don't make me, maybe.
The ultimate goal. So yeah, this is kind of a fun topic, narratives and gaming, because Tim and I are both pretty big avid video gamers. And we were also just before this like talking about how do we rein in this conversation, because we could go on for hours talking about the multiple games.
We used to have a blog on video games.
Oh, we did. Remember that?
Remember blogging? Remember before?
I just got paid out the advertising money from that, by the way. It's paying for the hosting. It's paying for the hosting. It's big $103 check, man. It's covering.
Let's go. What was that? 10 years of work.
Yeah. Zero payoff. So yeah, I don't know. We got a lot of things we could chat about here, but I think we want to kind of dive into not too much, but I don't know. How do you feel about video games as like we were talking about just before we started about like video games as art and people's.
Yeah, I know that there's like a really active debate whether video games are art, but I think I know how to solve it. Yeah. They are. Period. I think you can go in a lot of different directions, whether it's play, is it one artistic vision? It doesn't matter.
No, it's
they're art. But
yes.
And I think Roger Ebert's always brought up, because he said a few things kind of off the cuff in some conferences back in the day about video games not being art. They can never be art because they're goal oriented. Obviously, his experience in games and his experience in gaming narratives is probably very limited. But one quote that he said stuck out to me, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he was saying they can't be art because games don't explore the meaning of being a human like other art forms do. And I thought that was like a good way to start, because I think there's a lot of gaming narratives that really do explore what it means to be human.
Absolutely.
Like day to day or extenuating circumstances. There's games that have made me, empathize with characters, think differently about life. So I thought that was a good place to launch into our discussion.
I'm curious about when did he say that quote? Because obviously I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong here if you think otherwise, but I feel like we're kind of like a sweet heyday of like good storytelling happening in video games, and like that kind of becoming more of a focus, and like players are looking for that. Like if you don't have like a pretty good story or good characters in your game, like people are just kind of like, meh, okay. Unless it's like a really fun, there's another aspect of it just being a fun gameplay to do,
So I think it was 2006. He added some additional quotes in 2010. And he even kind of stepped in that, like, I think his complaint was the choose your own adventure aspect of gaming. Yeah. That, he saw them as moments for player choice.
Yeah.
So it can't be art because the player can affect the outcome. So like his example was like Romeo and Juliet's not Romeo and Juliet because you can choose to have a happy end.
Mm.
Now he also said that there are some gaming narratives that are locked in. And he would say, well, those aren't games necessarily. They're more like interactive experiences, right? So it's getting really nitty gritty and really specific.
Yeah.
But to me, it's almost like architecture or something, or like playground architecture. There's play and there's art. They can happen at the same time.
Yeah.
I think so many artists work on video games, you know, even stepping into VR and stepping into these spaces. It's so obvious that even away from the narratives, there's just art and artistry on display. You know, it's almost like a museum.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I firmly believe that games are art. I don't think all games are great art. I don't think all games make me think about, you know, what it means to be human. Some are just like a hamster wheel of checkboxes, like any kind of battle passy, Fortnite, Destiny, Call of Duty thing. I mean, yes, it's art, but it's a complete and utter bleed on my time that does not make me think at all, other than like dopamine hit, dopamine hit. But that's not what I wanted to focus on today. I think we're going to talk more about narratives and gaming narratives and the ones that kind of hit us.
I kind of coming back to that quick point of, you know, leaving it to player choice, and that's not really a way for someone to explore maybe human nature or whatnot. But I kind of disagree with that quite a bit, because there's games that you have your choose your own adventure, but maybe the story is still going to be canned in some way, where the developer or the artist is going to push you down a certain narrative that they want you to hear about. And there was one game, it was funny because I was going through, I put a list together of 20 games I thought of in like the last 5 years I've played that or just stood out to me in terms of story. And like, there's one that came out, I can't remember, this probably came out mid 2000s maybe. The game Spec Ops: The Line. Have you ever heard of this game? It's like a military.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, I think it was positioned as like a military shooter game, which I mean it is, right? Your military unit that goes into Dubai and like you're running some missions, whatever. But it was a game by Jaeger Development. Jaeger Development. But I just replayed it recently, and like it's all about like the terrors of war, and like and you're forced into these situations where you have to make choices that are just not good. And it's kind of an interesting exploration of just like war, how bad it is, because you think you're going into playing a shooter, which you are, but you're making choices like as a villain where like you're the good guy, but are you? Which is kind of like a really twist on like the war shooter video games. I think like there are those choose your own adventure moments, but they can have this very strong impact, you know, if there's like a clear narrative going on, right? And if the player's actually paying attention to what they're doing. So
wow, that game is old. That's like 12 years old.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Like what makes for a good narrative in a video game? I think there's a lot of parallels to like it's any storytelling, I think, right? You start with your characters. You have really interesting, awesome characters. You could like a few games off the top of my head, I could think of like Red Dead Redemption, right? And 1 and 2, right off the top of my head. Like those two games, like you are so into those characters, and they're not good people.
No,
they're not good people at all. But by the end of those games, like you are so invested in those two characters, your leads there. You actually feel for them like dying and or having to make a tough decision. And I think that's like any novel or any book or any story, right? So if you have a character that just you can relate to or connect to in some strong way, but by whatever actions or dialogue they're doing, that's it, right? That's number one.
I mean, for me, it's always the one that hits. Like, there's two games that I think are always brought up in the games as art and the great narratives discussions: BioShock. There's Last of Us, and talking about Last of Us, because there's a really nice comparison that we have now. We have Last of Us, the game, and the remakes and the remasters, and we have the HBO show, right? The game, I like the show just fine. But the game allowed me to identify and empathize with the main character so much, especially in that last scene, right? God. And it's something that the TV show was not as effective for me, just because I did not feel in the shoes. I was not in control, being forced really down this. I mean, to Roger Ebert's point, I didn't have a choice. I was forced to make a terrible decision at the end of that game.
Yes.
And it was very visceral and very ridiculous. Like, I like welled up and almost cried at the end of that game. I think in the end of the TV show, it follows the same beats. It's the same narrative structure. But for me, it felt very removed. Because and they kind of intentionally, like in the climax of the show, and I don't want to ruin it for those who haven't seen it, that instead of it being very visceral and gratuitous, they take a step back and they use like orchestration. Even the camera feels like a little further back. It's not
Yeah.
video gamey at all.
No, no, no.
But the video game for me hit a lot harder. It really made me empathize and think about humanity and the relationships that I've built over the course of this 12 to 15 hour experience, right?
Yeah.
I
Yep.
really felt tied in with these characters. So I think it's no coincidence that, that narrative and Druckmann's work was recognized and then, translated into a really successful HBO television show.
Yeah, because the basis behind the game is great characters, right? And the whole point of it, he even said it, like, it's a story of love. That's like, he's even said that's like the basis for it. And mix that, which is a core thing that we can all kind of connect with, and then you have these characters that you relate to even further, and it's kind of fun. I think the thing about Last of Us that got me in playing both those games, it's just like it's the humanity side of things, where like I was more terrified of the humans, the human characters, human NPCs, human villains in that game than I was of the zombies.
That's what stands out to me, right? It's those character
like,
moments. The first one is very much like I think it hit so hard, right? Because I just had my daughter, it was like a tale of like being a father, losing yourself and no longer defining yourself, shutting yourself down and then opening yourself back up to being that role again.
Yeah.
And then the sequel, so much about loss and revenge and like,
oh my God,
tainted humanity and like losing your way and like losing your, like both of them. I mean, I know that the sequel really landed poorly for a lot of folks. I absolutely loved it. Like absolutely loved it.
The second game, I love that game, and that game was brutal. And I think it was purposely that way, but it just felt so brutal to get through that game. And I mean that in like, not like it was difficult or anything like that, but it was just, when I got to the end, I like a sigh of relief. Yeah, it was emotionally brutal, and I got to the end of it, I just felt a sigh of relief of just like, holy shit.
I haven't felt that way after a piece of art since like Requiem for a Dream. Where I was like, I need to go away. I got a shower. I need
vacation. Something. I go stare at an ocean for like 10 hours or something. But I mean, and that's like the power of that too. I think you hit on it too with the first game of you're in those moments. And I think that's the difference with video games, is that you're playing these narratives that are very impactful and you're making these choices. But you're the one who's in there doing these things, whether or not you're being forced into them or not, or you have this illusion of a choice that's going to have an impact in the outcome. Think of games like Mass Effect, where you got a lot of choice to make things, branching out conversations.
I like Mass Effect because they patched in a better ending.
That's great.
Well, imagine you could do that with a book. It's like you launch a book and like a lot of people didn't like it, so you just like send them a new last 20 pages.
Yeah, right.
So sorry.
Here you go. So easy to do. Trying to draw parallels to writing novels and writing in general, because that's what we do here. Having a great setting, like a cool setting. I think that's also important. And immediately I think of games like Dead Space, or even like Fallout series. I haven't played Vegas, which I heard is like kind of like the better storytelling one wise, but like the atmosphere and the setting like that you're lived in, like Dead Space. I played that game 3 times. Like, I've never played a game that many times.
But I'd say like narrative wise, it's rote and
it's pretty straight. It's not anything special. I mean, it's good. Okay, maybe, like there's nothing special about the narrative in that. It's pretty straightforward, like your survival horror.
Isn't he like looking
movie
for his wife or something?
I can't remember the first one now. I played it 3 times. I should remember. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's not a bad point, right? Like the writing isn't good because well, maybe let me back up. The writing isn't memorable, but the atmosphere and the dread was memorable. So I'd argue that's not a good gaming narrative. I'd say that's good gameplay design and setting and atmosphere. It's actually missing that thread that Last of Us has, right? Like when I think Last of Us, I actually think of the story.
Yeah. Yep.
Now there's the moment to moments, like, you're sneaking around clicker, whatever else, you're avoiding a sniper. All that's really kind of cool. But when I think about those games, I'm thinking about the characters and the stories they go through and not how cool the gameplay was, really, at least for me. That's what stands out. Even though Last of Us 2 had some of the best, most visceral combat I can think of, it's almost secondary to the story to me. Uncharted is a great example. I like thinking about these a little bit. The ones that I think for a long time, games tried to emulate movies,
Hmm.
right? Whether it was Pitfall and Indiana Jones,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
even Dead Space being like kind of Alien, or Doom kind of being like Alien, which is okay, having your influences. But for a long time, it seemed like emulation, like they were trying to hit that. And now I think there's certain instances where gaming can almost provide a more relatable experience, empathetic experience, visceral experience than movies can,
Yeah.
or books can. So Uncharted, I think, is a good example, whereas the first one feels like, oh, it's trying to be kind of Indiana Jones, it's Tomb Raidery.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
The Thief's End
Yet,
was a great one. Like that, the fourth
right, well,
game.
I
Like
think
that
they take
was.
that character, and once again, we're talking about Naughty Dog again,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that character changes. You learn so much about his like history, his relationships, his family, his goals, why he is
Yeah.
how he is. And by the end of the fourth one, it's like this beautiful swan song, this beautiful arc
Yeah.
that I would say is like the narrative is wonderful, as the games progress.
Yeah. And they still maintain like the fun of the action and the gameplay itself while having this narrative that's just like a fun adventure too. I'm coming back to Dead Space. I'm defending my saying on Dead
Okay.
Space because it's all coming back to me now.
Okay.
Because remember at the end of Dead Space, the beginning of Dead Space 2, you're in like not an insane asylum, but you're in an asylum, aren't you? That's when you come out of there. So like
I don't remember. It's been a long time.
yeah, the first Dead Space was more about like going through these horrors and then dealing with your own sanity as the game progresses. Because at the end of that game, you don't like you defeat the monsters, but you end up like I think in an insane asylum or something. Because that's how Dead Space 2 starts. So it's like
Yeah.
basically about like going through like this gauntlet of like terrors and like tragedies and whatnot, and like surviving that, and mostly about you not like your conscious and your brain like cracking because of like going through this stuff. So I defend my Dead Space as a good narrative. So
That feels more like a haunted house to me, right? That's like a monster in a closet.
well, it's still within that genre too, which that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting aspect to this too, is thinking about the genre and the story expectations, right? For like
Yeah,
what
but
you're
so
getting on that.
for me, the Isaac character in Dead Space, and maybe it's different in the remake, is a hollow avatar for the player to step into, like Master Chief, like Samus and Metroid. Like he doesn't have any character. Does he have characterization?
He does, but not until later on when you start kind of uncovering more of the story.
Okay, maybe I need to replay it because to me it was just kind of like you're this faceless avatar that's shooting the limbs off of. Like the gameplay hook is dismemberment and
100%.
monster in a closet. You're getting scared
And
while
the
exploring.
environment is just beautiful, and it's
Oh, it's so good. I mean, here's the thing.
amazing,
I loved
but
the first Dead Space and I want to buy the remake, but the narrative doesn't stand out to me. But maybe that's just because I haven't played it in so long.
no, that's fair. I don't think it like again. I think there's a good point of like the genre expectation for like the game you're playing too, as like with any novel, right? If you
Yeah.
maybe novels you can get a little bit more. I shouldn't say that. I think there's a genre expectation. Like you play a Dead Space game, you're expecting a survival horror game. You're expecting to be playing Alien. Like that's kind of what it is, right?
So here's a crazy thing. Genre expectation, survival horror, good narratives. I think Silent Hill 2. That game came out before Dead Space, yet
Yeah.
I can remember James Sunderland, maybe his last name, his search for his wife, his descent into insanity,
Yeah,
the monsters representing like his own psychoses.
that sounds like Dead Space because he's searching for his wife and the monsters. He
Yeah.
gets through his own sanity, right? It's like
So for some reason, Silent Hill 2 stands out to me as like almost like proto. It's like the first step for like successful gaming narratives for me.
yeah,
I was young, I was like, wow, games can do this. Like games are stepping into this. It's not just a monster in a closet. It's not just because it felt so much more grounded than like Resident Evil that came before it, which I love Resident Evils, but I would never say the narratives in those games are good.
no,
Even the recent ones, I played through all of them. I love them, but I'm not like, wow, what a great, amazing narrative and character journey I've been on.
yeah.
So let's agree to disagree. I don't know. I also need to replay Dead Space. It's
Yeah.
not as fresh in my mind.
Yeah, I'd give it another shot. So I mean, what other aspects like that we think about for novel writing that we can tie to games? Characters, obviously, I think that's the number one.
I
Setting.
would love to talk to somebody who's written a game because I feel like you need to have the beats. You need to have this like 3-act arc while at the same time giving sandboxes. And I think it's one not to keep coming back to Last of Us or even Red Dead. The Last of Us is more locked in than Red Dead. Red Dead being open world, but providing sandboxes during the beats,
Yes.
like making sure like so you've got your arc and then you have these almost like pit stops for the character to make their limited sets of choices, like how you're going to get to the next beat.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me. Like in Last of Us when Ellie sets out when Joel is wounded, and she comes across like the cannibal cult, right? And
Yeah.
and there's that whole section where like you're sneaking around and like the lounge catches fire. Like
Hmm.
that's all inside a beat. Like
Hmm.
you're close to an all's lost there,
Yep. Yep.
right? That's pretty much all's lost. And then you come through it, you get your dark night, and then that's really transitioning that whole scene. And when Joel meets up with her is Dark Knight. I'm sorry, it's All's Lost, Dark Knight, and break into Act 3.
Yep.
All right there.
Yep.
And it's so easy to see, and it works so well. Like it
Yeah.
brings the characters together. It's like, oh, it's so good. Like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It's like masterful writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if I can think of other games that do it to that effect. I'm sure Red Dead does to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think Red Dead does. God
Red
of
Dead's like, we're gonna kill your horse, all's lost.
Oh, it's like replacing your horse with a car. Go catch some legendary fish. I was actually thinking about the latest God of War game, the 2018 one. Just had like a father-son, and kind of like what a great story and the way they did that.
Love that game.
I thought that was
Love that
fantastic.
game.
I also think, kind of sidestepping here a bit, tying the theme to the gameplay. I mean, I think that's kind of another core part of a narrative. A good narrative is having a theme and maybe having what's the thing you're trying to tell. I'm trying to think of games that did this so well that I've played recently, and listeners, that there's millions of games out there, and I'm sure everyone's got their own opinions of what games do this well, and there's tons that we're not even going to mention that are still really good. But the one that stands out to me the most is that game Celeste by Maddie Makes Games, side-scrolling 8-bit style game, and that game the story of that game is like about anxiety and depression. And it comes through in the gameplay because the game is hard. It is so hard. And it gets you this anxiety to get through, levels and missions. And then it's tying to the theme of the story of, yourself and understanding who you are and this anxiety of appearance and everything else. And it's just like, what? Like, what?
You're making me backtrack a little bit mentally, because now I'm thinking about your point with Dead Space, right? And I was like, oh, gaming narratives. And I'm really picturing like, since this is a writer's podcast, I'm picturing words on a page.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're right that these gameplay elements
tie into like the theme and whatnot, right? Like at least a good one. Maybe you don't recognize it, but like that one, Celeste was like just punched me in the face with like, I'm so anxiety right now, but that's the point, and that's the theme of the game is about dealing with anxiety and depression. And I got depressed because I couldn't get past certain points of the game. It was so hard. I'm like, I'm not going to play this game ever again, but I come back to it, So I think that's an interesting element that it connects. And I think that's something that you think about a theme for a novel, and then you think about a theme and the gameplay and tying it in a video game is just, that's where you can really pull at the player's emotional state. And I think that even the Last of Us games, I think it does the same thing. Like that gameplay is it's nerve wracking. It's anxiety. It's it's brutal at some points, or it's terrifying because you need to get through this area. And I think that's part of it. That's part of this theme of like surviving.
It's making me think of Inside.
I was just, that was one I was looking for.
Beautiful side-scrolling game. It's light on plot, but heavy on atmosphere and heavy on like, maybe we're dipping into metaphor, simile, right? Like we're dealing with like visual elements that are meant to represent whether it be society or the character's feelings, and they're not doing it so much with traditional 3-act structured narratives that are written on a page that at least that we're consuming in that way. I'm sure they have their own structure, but it's not like a character-driven narrative as much as it is like an experience.
Yeah. That's another great piece. Like what the things you think about again for writing a novel. You think about the structure of the story and how you're going to tell it. Are you going to tell it out of order? Are you going to do flashbacks and this sort of thing? I was thinking games like that would be one that jumps out to me right off the bat is that game Nier Automata. Did you ever play that one?
I did.
And that game is wild. That game is like you play and you can win in 2 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. And then it rolls the credits and you're like, oh, okay, that's weird. And then you come back and like the more you play the game, you find these different endings. You start exploring more about the environment, the world, and the characters and what's going on, which is like kind of like this unstructured story, like unstructured narrative, but is really fun and just like kind of a cool thing to do. Like there's like 99 different endings to that game. I think I got through like 20 of them.
Yeah.
And it's just like, what a what a cool way to structure the narrative. Interesting way to approach the storytelling, but doing that in a video game format, I think, allows you that freedom of, kind of creativity. Whereas a novel would be really hard to like.
It makes me think of did you ever play Stanley Parable?
No.
It's all narration, pretty much. It's like you're in the world like of this office worker.
Yeah.
Things are kind of going amiss, but the narrator is like a little mischievous and a little devious. It's got this wry sense of humor throughout. It's really quite wonderful.
Yeah.
So like the narrator is like, you take a left, but you take a right. And he's like, where are you going? Like, you're supposed to take a left. It's quite great. It's a very indie experience. The promise of it seems bigger than it is. Like when the credits rolled, quote unquote, I was surprised how short it was.
Yeah.
But it's a great little narrative experience.
Yeah, thinking more about the elements of storytelling, thinking about POV, which character are you controlling, and how is the games like that kind of almost breaking the fourth wall? How is that interacting? I think of like that, I can't remember which one it is. The Metal Gear series is just kind of wild. There's some really good games. There was some, cool narratives, and there's some that are just kind of like, okay, what's going on? I can't remember which game it was. I remember playing that game, and I was like late at night one. It was one of the earlier ones, and there's a moment where you're going through this really difficult area, and your little commander guy, he pops up in the left corner, and he's like, hey, Snake, what are you doing? It's like, so he's talking to the character, and then all of a sudden he breaks the fourth wall and he starts talking to you. Do you remember that? And he starts talking to the player. And I remember playing and being so stressed out about trying to get through the section. He's like, maybe you've been playing for too long. Maybe you should stop playing and take a break. I was like, what is happening right now? Did I break the game? Like, I just remember that so like standing out and like this thing, because I think it got hacked or whatever. But it was like then breaking the fourth wall and talking to me, the player, and telling me to stop playing because they didn't want me to complete this mission. I was like, well, that's a flip on the POV there, and kind of just
I think that's why Kojima's talked. Like, I don't think, no offense, I mean, Kojima's narratives, like most recently he did like Death Stranding. They're crazy. They're just, like they're wacky, Lynchian, but like they're so, I don't know. I would never say that he's a good writer.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I take that back. I don't know. It's weird. I feel like he can be so direct and so lacks all nuance. And like his metaphor is so direct. It's like, we're building connections. There's these strands that connect humanity. It's like what he's saying is so above. There's no subtext. Like we just had our episode on like metaphor and simile a couple ago. His are so obvious and so above the board that for me as an adult, it seems tacky. But maybe, for younger kids, it's meaningful. I don't know. I know he's trying.
Yeah. It does like feel. I haven't played the Death Stranding game, but it does feel. Remember when did you finish that game? You played it, but did you finish it or?
Oh, dude, that game. Like, I've got friends who love it because they played it through the pandemic. They're like, it's like I'm walking outside. I'm like, go walk outside. Let's go.
It's okay.
Because the gameplay is, I mean,
that's it.
I think the gameplay is terrible.
I haven't played. I haven't touched it yet. So.
Even the concept is like not great. And then like the concept, like you deliver packages, to metaphorically connect these disjointed sections of society back together.
Yeah.
While avoiding monsters. And the character falls frustratingly a ton. You have to move super slow, which I get it's kind of the point, but it's like, I don't know. I still feel like the vehicle, I don't know, but so much of it feels broken.
Yeah.
it feels like a beta.
Yeah.
I'd say the narrative is better than the gameplay, and the narrative is not good.
Yeah.
It's big and it's sprawling. It's beautiful. It takes a great screenshot, a great picture. It feels very anime and futuristic.
Yep.
But it feels like a greatest hits of sci-fi, anime, horror. It doesn't feel like anything that's tied together. When you have a character who's the president's son,
classic,
who needs to these packages. I don't know. It's
just a little over the place.
It's all over the place.
What's your take
on?
So
simple.
What's your take on games like Heavy Rain, the Quantic Dream, like that kind of? That's definitely like a choose your own adventure, multiple endings, but it's still got this underlying narrative that runs along. But then it's almost like a kind of a mystery detective, story. I mean, it is. But that's
closest thing to playing a movie, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
It's back to like the kind of choose your own adventure, or most recently, Netflix has kind of done it with Kimmy Schmidt or Black Mirror, where you have very rudimentary choices in those to what the characters are going to do.
Yeah.
So things like Heavy Rain or Detroit Become Human, I absolutely love those games.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the control was horrendous in Heavy Rain. I felt like I was driving a Buick instead of a character. Like, I don't know why they decided to have like,
yeah.
Anyway, the main character controls were terrible, and they resolved that in Detroit Become Human. It's a little overwhelming, like the amount of choices and the amount of endings that you can have for each character.
Yeah.
But I loved it. And honestly, right now that game is a little viral on TikTok for some reason.
Detroit Become Human?
Yeah, my daughter came up to me. She's like, "Can we play this game?"
What?
And I was like, "We played it with you 3 years ago, you know."
Let's play it again. We're going back.
And then we turned it off because it was way too violent.
Yeah, that one gets yeah.
But no, I love those games. And it's interesting, right? Because kind of back to Ebert's point, they're not gamey.
Yeah.
They feel like experiences.
Yep.
But the narratives are you're very locked in. You have choices,
Sure.
but you are really affecting the outcomes for the characters.
Yeah.
And there's not just one or two, there's like 7 outcomes that affect, the rest of the story.
Yeah.
Such an interesting way to write. How about you? How do those land with you? Do you like those?
I love them. I played Heavy Rain, I think, a couple times. When they re-released it on PlayStation, I got it again and replayed it. I think I had a different ending. But yeah, I love that storytelling. I love the mystery aspect of it. And it's, like you said, it's like an immersive movie, basically.
So it's no coincidence that they cast very established actors in some of those roles and they use their likeness. Like, what was the second one, with Elliot Page?
Beyond Two Souls. I played that one as well.
Beyond Two Souls.
Had Willem Dafoe in there as well.
Oh, wow. I mean, and Kojima does it too. Like, Kojima has, like, Mads Mikkelsen is in.
Yeah. Yep.
So's Del Toro. I mean, Norman Reedus is the main character.
Yeah.
And they look like themselves. It's just that the story is terrible. It's just terrible. I wouldn't say it's not art. I'd say it's artful. And I think Kojima would probably disagree. He's gone on the record historically saying games are not art. They are experiences.
Yeah.
I will say his narratives are barely art.
Heard it here first, folks. Tim taking swings at Kojima.
Nothing's as bad as, so we're talking about good examples, that we've had.
Yeah.
The worst example of a game narrative that I've ever played through, and it's so bad that it sticks out in my brain. I bought this remake of Bionic Commando that came out maybe 10 years ago. And the gameplay was fine. It was kind of Spider-Man-esque. You're swinging around with your bionic arm.
Yeah.
And the story's bad, but the finale is even worse because you realize that your bionic arm isn't just your bionic arm. It's your dead wife. You have a wife arm. And it was so bad that I was like, oh my God. What a wonderful example of terrible writing.
A dead wife arm.
And you took the one fun thing about your game, your arm, like the gameplay mechanic of swinging, and you ruined it by making it dead wife. That makes sense to me.
But I think that's a good point, though, too. Is like we're calling out all these great games, the great stories and great narratives, and like any other art form, any other books and movies, whatever. There's a lot of crap, and in games, there's like some that are just like, man, what 15-year-old is writing this story right now? Who's writing this dialogue? Why are you writing this dialogue? I've definitely played some games.
Like a lot of that's the lack of I think that's the so many chefs in the kitchen type of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas like sometimes gameplay overrides the importance of narrative.
Yeah.
Or they're just kind of making or they don't really care about the narrative so much, and it's just about a gameplay loop.
Yeah, which hey, sometimes you just need that quick little thing if it's fun. I know I like the Duke Nukem series. That kind of was just like like the later ones they rebooted or whatever, were just kind of a mess in terms of what are you doing?
Yeah,
why are you writing
those
this?
Are and all of those are right. It's like a mixture of 80s machismo mixed with They Live and Ash from Evil Dead.
Yep.
Which if it's a DOS game, back in the 80s, I think expectations were different. That's a little fun thing for a kid to play through. But I don't know how you modernize Duke Nukem and give it a good story. I think it's why there's been 2 or 3 that have failed recently. Yeah. Whereas Doom, they've had just 2 very successful, contemporary retellings of Doom. But it's all gameplay. I would never say that story is good.
No.
You rip, you tear. It's essentially Guitar Hero, but killing demons.
Yeah.
But there's no narrative at play. It's just a gameplay loop. That's fine.
Now, as an adult, as we're both adults, somewhat.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself looking more for games that will have a good story, or does that matter to you? doesn't matter.
It's kind of like what I'm in the mood for. I'd say just like TV or movies. Sometimes I'll sit down and I want to play Helldivers with a friend and kill a bunch of bugs like Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
Then there's other days that I want to sit down and have like a slow experience, and I'll play Alan Wake 2, which is, very narrative heavy.
Yeah, yeah.
Super derivative, but very narrative heavy and engaging.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it just depends on how I'm feeling. I feel like for those games that have a narrative, I need to have the time. I want to play for more than 30 minutes, more than an hour. I want to get invested. I can't really kind of pop in. It's almost like reading a book. You don't want to just sit down and read 5 pages and close it and go away. You set aside a bit of time to read and get invested.
Yeah.
And also like the single player narrative experiences, they're isolating. And I game a lot of the time to be social with friends.
Yep.
Like the vast majority of my game time is spent playing with other people. But I do think it's an absolute drain on time. You got to be really, really careful, especially if you're trying to balance other priorities,
Yeah, like writing.
I remember like when I was working on, the first draft of my book, I was giving myself like a cookie system. I was like, if you write 2,000 words, you get to play games later.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that great, but in the same respect, I don't play games during the day. Like I won't do it.
Yep.
I've got too much other stuff going on.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you have an example of bad narratives in video games? Like anything that stands out to you?
Bad narratives. I'll give you one. The Ghost Recon series. How about that?
Oh my God. Yeah.
The latest one, Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Now that game is fun with friends.
They tried to have a narrative then. Didn't they have the guy who played the Punisher?
Yeah.
In there? John Bernthal?
Yeah, John Bernthal. Yeah, like that series, like again, and that's a huge game. Like that's a big Ubisoft game, right? It's Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Like even the one before that, the Wildlands, like, teetering on some controversial kind of stereotyped characters, and like that's all they did. And I think that one really kind of stands out to me as just being kind of lazy and just like it's wild that they put so much effort and so much into this narrative that is just not good. Like
didn't help that game was so broken on release.
Beyond broken. And that definitely didn't help. I agree. But that one kind of stands out as like a big game that everyone was waiting for. We were waiting for to play as friends.
Well, they sold it, right? They showed the trailers, the acting's great, the actor's great. You're like, oh my God, they're really kind of upping the realism here. And then you get into the game and you're like, oh my God.
What is this?
What is this?
And I think it's tough because then you've got these big open world, games like Ghost Recon ones, Grand Theft Autos,
Assassin's
Creed games, like none of those. The Assassin's Creed game, I think maybe one or two that actually had a story I was somewhat interested in. It was like the second one and maybe Brotherhood.
Yeah, with Ezio, I liked that one, and then the Egypt one I liked for some reason.
Oh yes, Origins. Yeah, that was a good one. But those are pretty tough. Like Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5 definitely stand out as like, these are a little more interesting because again, characters. Like you have the 3 characters you're jumping between for 5, which made it interesting because they're all completely different and there was such tension between them. But
come back to Assassin's Creed Origins, the reason why I think that worked for me was because it was emulating The Witcher. And I think Witcher 3 actually has a really good story. Now it's based on books. Now there's a Netflix series. So it makes sense that there's a narrative at play. It's kind of leaning on pre-existing characters and character arcs and world building.
Yeah.
But I loved Witcher 3. And in fact, I'm replaying some of it now. It's just a really good game.
Yeah, it's funny, like when you start playing games like Ghost Recon with these like big, epic narratives that they've got going on, or they're so bad that you find yourself just like Xing through dialogue because the dialogue is just so poorly written. It's like,
I do that in Baldur's Gate. I'm like, yep. Or you know what I do? I put on subtitles and I skim it.
Yeah.
Because you read faster than they poorly deliver it. So it's like, all right, we're going. Come on here. I don't have 52 hours. Like.
No, not at all. But yeah, and I'm trying to think like other games I had. There was one, I'm blanking on the name of it. That's probably a good thing. But it was so bad. I remember playing with a friend of ours, and it's a co-op game, and we're playing. We sat there and we were laughing at the dialogue. It was just so bad, and that wasn't on purpose. They weren't writing this dialogue for comedic effect. We were laughing at it because it was so terrible and so bad and just so cringy. And you're like, don't do this. Don't do this. Yeah. Like, have someone review this. Have anyone review it. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So changing gears a little bit, because Witcher made me think of it. There's times where I'll read a book and it'll influence me to play a game, or I'll play a game and it will influence me to read a book. Like Witcher, I went back and read one of those books.
Oh, interesting.
Right now I'm reading Roadside Picnic.
Yep.
which is a Russian novel. Really because there's a new game out that I haven't played, but I've heard about called Pacific Drive,
Yes.
which has a very similar concept of like aliens have come to Earth, they left their junk behind.
Yep.
You know, I had no idea Roadside Picnic inspired the movie Stalker by Tarkovsky.
Mm.
I had no idea that it inspired the Stalker video games that came out in the early aughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm reading it now, and I like thinking about like the game novel connection.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Has that ever happened to you, where you've like gone out and sought out a book because of a game, or vice versa, or you wanted to get more of a certain feeling? So like maybe you enjoyed The Last of Us, so you went and read The Road or something.
I probably have. I don't think I can name like specific examples of doing that. But I can definitely going the reverse way where where I've read a book that's like maybe a thriller or an adventure game. I'm like, you know what? I really want to play some type of thriller or adventure game, So I've kind of gone that way where my brain's in that mode of like, or I'm reading some fantasy thing and all of a sudden
like continue that experience.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, I want to go, I just, reading the book about Vikings. I want to go play, Assassin's Creed Valhalla or go play Valheim or, one of these games that kind of give you that same kind of, feel. Cause you're in that world. So I've had that happen quite a bit. Watching The Witcher 3. I had started Witcher 3 and never finished it. I actually picked up the remaster or whatever they did. And watching the series got me into wanting to play that game. So I picked up the new one.
Yeah.
But there's nothing I found where I was like, is this a book or anything like that? And kind of gone the opposite way.
Yeah, because some of them, I think the ones that are successful, do use the beats, the ones that stand out. And I don't think all of them do.
I don't think so either. I think a lot of them are, and again, I mean, making a video game it takes a lot of people,
Yeah.
Unless you're making something, simple with like 3 or 4 people, which has happened, but certainly and with good storylines, no doubt. But you get some of these bigger games where like they're so big that the focus is, do they lose track of like the actual story they're telling because there's so many moving pieces?
Yeah, I always feel like that falls on the shoulders of the creative director sometimes, like because they have to balance all the different aspects of it.
Yeah.
You brought up God of War before, and I think that fits very nicely into a 3-act structure. The new one, not the first 3, which were kind of solely gameplay.
Yeah.
But like that 2018 reboot, that's a really tight story.
Yeah.
That's plotted and beated out, really well.
Yeah.
Very much in the vein of Last of Us, actually.
I'm finding myself these days, like you were commenting this before, just having the time for this. I love playing video games. I think they're great. And there's ones you play to play with friends. You get the Helldivers, which is just a goofy time. It's more of a social thing. Even playing some of the online stuff like the Red Dead Online or whatever, if it's good. But honestly, like personally looking for single player games, I'm looking for games I can get done in like 12 hours. I'm looking for like these Celeste. I'm looking for these small stories. I'm looking for games that are like, I can play in like I said, 6 to 10 to 12 hours, but have like a good narrative or something they're trying to tell. I think that's more interesting to me. These big open world games, I think I'm just getting tired of, going and fetching feathers and doing all this stuff. Cause I also, my OCD doesn't allow me to like not go get that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, everybody is really hungry for our time.
Yes.
Right. And we need to be as protective as you can about it, especially if you want to write, you want to edit. So, but I do think, it goes both ways. I think that games can be inspirational. I think they've inspired me sometimes.
Absolutely.
Or they can completely gobble up your time.
Yep.
And waste your whole life.
Choose wisely.
Choose wisely.
Choose wisely. All right. Well, I think that's all. I think that's everything we got to talk about that. I mean, there's more we could talk about it, but I
think we could go on forever.
We probably could.
We should have another podcast.
We should have a whole nother
Gamer
one.
Syndrome.
Yeah, Gamer Syndrome. 8-bit review coming back. Yeah, so this is fun. This is a fun mashup of things we love and kind of breaking them down. What have you been watching, reading lately? We were talking about playing.
As I said, I finished Haunting of Hill House, the book.
Yeah,
so good, dude.
Yeah.
Like, so it was nice to finally read a good book in genre.
Yeah.
It was so good that I almost feel like the Netflix quote unquote adaptation, which is not an adaptation. Really, I think they just kind of bought the property name and they have some references. It is not the same story whatsoever.
Yeah.
It makes me feel weird because it'd be like somebody buying The Shining and then having completely new characters in the Overlook Hotel or something.
Yeah.
So it feels, I understand that, there's a power of IP and name recognition, but the Haunting of Hill House Netflix show is not anything like the book.
Yeah.
There's moments, there's a few scenes, but they're 2 very, very different stories.
Yeah.
I kind of wish the Netflix show was titled something different because it could have been. Nobody would say, "Oh wow, this is too much like Hill House." It's
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
But regardless, both are successful. But I loved that book, and I just picked up Roadside Picnic, which I mentioned before. It's a Russian novel, relatively new-ish translation, early aughts. It's okay. That like the pitch is cool. You know, I mentioned it before. Aliens have come to Earth. They left. They left a bunch of junk behind in these kind of zones that are walled off, or and these stalkers go in and they pick up these alien artifacts that they will sell to the highest bidder. But
Yeah.
it's fraught with peril. There's slime and alien cobwebs or whatever, and people die. It's like really, really like dangerous to go into these zones. So the concept is good, but the main character it's very pulpy and kind of like crime fiction-y, where he's like a tough guy and he's smoking his cigarettes and he's slapping people and he's objectifying women. And I'm
Yeah.
like, this isn't my bag. Like, I
Yeah.
don't care about this. Like, I like the world that's built, but the main character that's in there so far is not good.
Yeah.
What's a little interesting, it's written by brothers. The first act is first person narrative. Second act, limited third.
What the
Very
heck?
weird.
Yeah,
Or
that's
actually, maybe not limited third, maybe objective third. It was a really abrupt transition, which makes me think that different brothers wrote different sections. I'm not sure. But the character sucks in both sections, I think. I don't love him. And then
yeah,
as far
that's-
as watching, we just finished True Detective Night Country.
I haven't started it yet. Yeah, is that good?
Not since
you can't-
Silo have I
Oh,
disliked the
man.
show so much.
Wow. Now I gotta watch it.
So I love Jodie Foster.
Yes.
Like the actors are wonderful. It's shot relatively well. The story has pieces that should have made a good story. It is not a good story. It is garbage.
Wow.
I,
Taking
And I
swings at
think anybody
Kojima,
who-
taking swings at
Yeah.
Night Country.
I've talked to people, who are like, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
It has the pieces of something good. I'm not saying it's not good from like this representation angle, because there is that. Like it's great. Like the representation is good. The, indigenous voices are really good. It's all of that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's just when it comes to their 3-act structure
Yeah.
and their characterization and what information they're sharing when, it was deeply unsatisfying for me.
Wow. All right.
So anyway, enjoy
Okay.
that.
Phew.
Come back and yell at me.
Well, no, hey, listeners, come back and listen to me, tell Tim he's wrong. I don't know. I haven't watched it yet, so I might agree. I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe I won't.
How about you? What are you watching? What are you reading?
Let's see. Watching not much at all, honestly, but now I'm going to watch this True Detective thing. I'll bump that up on the list. I feel like I just finished a show, but I don't remember what it was, so it wasn't good. Reading wise, just cranking through some stuff. I finished that Orphan X book by Greg Hurwitz. That was like a thriller. It was okay. It was fine. I don't know if I go back to the character, but it's a pretty standard like superhero of a thriller kind of guy. He wasn't a superhero, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, he can do everything. He's
Yeah.
like, what's it? What's the male version of a Mary Sue?
He's a Jack Reacher.
A
He's
Gary Sue?
Gary. I think it's just John. It's John.
Johnny
Jack,
Sue?
Jack John. So yeah, it was fine. It was good. Checked off all the boxes for that genre.
How sexist is it that we have a term for like Mary Sue and we don't have one for guys? That's ridiculous, since most guy narratives are like that.
I think there is one. And
Oh, is there?
Gary Stew.
A Luke Skywalker?
Yeah, Gary Stew. There you go. So yeah, the male character with similar traits may be labeled as Gary Stew or Marty Stew. So there you go.
Marty McFly?
Yeah, I think it's just that Mary Sue. It could be applied to. So yeah, that one finished that Unwind book by Neil Shusterman. Kind of a young adult science fiction-y story about kids being unwound and their parts being taken.
Oh, you mentioned that. That sounds like such a crazy setup.
And there's one scene when I don't want to spoil it. It's a good read. It's fun. It's not fun. It's wild. But moves. I like the pacing of it. Once I get going, I just kind of crank through it. So I enjoyed it. And there's a couple sequels to it, I guess. I don't know if I'd go diving deep into the rest of that world, but maybe at some point I come back to it. Speaking of kind of just the generic thriller silhouetted guy on the cover, I started The Gray Man by Mark Greaney. Is the book that the Netflix movie with Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans is based on.
Okay.
The movie, it was done by the Russo brothers, or one of them. It wasn't.
Really?
It wasn't very good. I didn't really. I mean, I watched it. It just was like, this isn't Netflix. Just writing out checks to people and just let them do whatever they want.
Yeah.
it's like you think this would be a recipe for something good, but it just wasn't. And the book is fine. He's just another character. He's like Gary Stu, just another Gary Stu.
Can do
guy.
everything.
Yeah, you could swap him out for the Orphan X character. You can just swap all these guys out they're the same. Which is totally fine. Writing wise, it's good. I mean, it's fine. It's it's nothing, not blowing my socks off, but it's like I know it's going to happen.
Is it because it's like a male fantasy, like a male power fantasy? It's like easier for you to step into these faceless, arcless
100%.
roles.
Yeah, 100%.
I guess
James Bond's
power fantasies.
Yeah, it's the James Bond. It's the Jack Reachers. It's not nothing new. Static characters, which again is fine. They don't all have to be.
Does Jason Bourne? I mean, he had some characterization. Is that different, or is that or did the movie add it? And was he just one of these Reacher characters in the books?
No. I think the book. I didn't read all of them. I just read the first Jason Bourne one. No, it had that characterization and that it did in the movies.
Okay.
At least he had some type of change and something he was, you know what I mean? It wasn't just like I'm expert at everything and who's going to take me down? Oh, I got shot. That's my big, all his lost moment. I got shot in the arm. I'm going to come back. But it's fine. It's whatever. So yeah, that's been it.
I got two closing thoughts.
Yeah, go for it.
One, I wanted to give a shout out to Skill Up because I would not have picked up Roadside Picnic without that video game reviewer.
Nice.
And two, you have an update about your, aren't you doing something, something book related?
I am, but by the time this episode comes out, it'll have already passed. But yes, and this as a recording next week, I'm doing a book event down in Connecticut at RJ Julia Booksellers. So
that's awesome. Congratulations on getting that. I know that was competitive, and I know that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big step. It's to have them. They're pretty well known independent bookstore, indie bookstore. So yeah, it's gonna be exciting. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be interesting. I'm on a panel with 4 other authors and get to talk about the book and do some signings. And there's a Q&A. So it'll be my first like real organized book event. So
cool. Congratulations, dude.
Thanks, man. So next episode, I'll let you know how it went.
Awesome.
But so yeah, that's it. That's our episode. Thanks for listening. We'll be back. Our next one, we're going to dive back into kind of like the details of writing. We're going to do structuring chapters. So we'll see what that means.
It'll be a page turner. Let's go.
Okay. All right. We're done here. If you enjoyed the episode, if you know someone that did, you should share with them. Follow us on Instagram at Writer Syndrome Books. We're on Twitter at Writer_Syndrome. We're on YouTube. You can find us there. Wherever you're listening, just follow. And you can go to our website and find all of our episodes. Reach out to us if you're a writer, author, or just interested in hearing about any topics you want us to talk about. All that info is at writersyndrome.com.